do a bit of a demonstration. So let's see if I can bring in a box for you. So I wanted to recognize and acknowledge that words like spectrum and interference and spurious emissions and frequency, they can all be difficult to understand, but what I'm hoping to do today is not to explain to you what they are, but to show you. The first thing I want to show you is spectrum. Almost every human being experiences spectrum pretty much all day, every day in the form of light. And it's a critical concept to understand that visible light is part of the spectrum. And the only thing that sets light waves apart from radio waves is the frequency. And then the second concept is that of frequency. When we as humans think about frequency, we experience that in terms of color. So red light is a specific frequency. Blue light is a specific frequency, yellow light, a specific frequency, just the same way that radio altimeters are operating at a different frequency. Now, we can't see them, but if our eyes could see them, we would see all kinds of amazing things in today's technology world. We would see cell phone towers and they would be blazing away, and we would see satellites and GPS. We would see microwaves, we would see radio, we would see it all. Our eyes don't see it, but if we could, that's what we would see. So, aviation radio altimeters, they operate at that 4.2 to 4.4 gigahertz frequency. And what we can do is we can assume that we'll just take that frequency and we'll move it up to where we can see. So we'll assume that this red blinking light is our radio altimeter. And we put it into our environment, and you can see the environment. In a sterile environment, it's very clear to be able to discern that red blinking light. And if you are on a plane and it is critical for you in order to land to be able to see that light, you want to have it be very clear as to whether that light is blinking or not. The challenge that we run into sometimes is that, as I talked about, these cell phone frequencies, they're close. They're at a different frequency, or in our case, a different color. So you might think about a cell phone tower as broadcasting in a blue light. Now, if you're very clear, if you're very detailed, you can go in and you can actually still see that blinking red light in the midst of the blue light. But at some point, as I increase the blue light, the signal power, you lose it. Your eyes, your antenna can't discern. All they see is the blue. One option is to be able to install a filter. So my filter here filters out the blue light, and it allows the red light to pass through. But no filter is perfect, and at some point, as the blue light, close to, but not exactly on top of that red light, as it increases, you even lose the red light because the filter itself can't prevent, it's not perfect enough to prevent all that blue light from getting through. So that's one issue, is that we're concerned about the strength of the signals that are very close to our blinking red light. The second issue is the fact that no transmitter is perfect. And what that means is that it may be that your cell phone tower is broadcasting at a blue frequency, but every transmitter has a little bit of extra emissions in different frequencies. Those are called spurious emissions. And if your spurious emissions are at the same frequency as my radio altimeter, there's simply no way that you will be able to keep using that radio altimeter because it gets drowned out by the light, by the emissions that are coming from the cell phone tower. And the fact is, there are not filters that exist that allow you to effectively filter that out, because it would filter out the signal as well as the noise, those spurious emissions. So those are the two concepts that we wanted to provide today. Number one is the adjacent signal and the concern that that causes. And the second is also the spurious emissions, those emissions that are happening right where I'm trying to see my blinking red light. And what we're advocating for is let's work together between industries to make sure that we always are able to see these radio altimeter signals and that our cell phone signals are effective and that we can, in fact, use all of our cell phones today. So what I'd like to do now is pass it back on over to Dee, and she's going to talk a little bit about where are we now and then where are we going.
All right. Well, Tim, thank you so much. And good afternoon, everyone. And thank you for joining us. Tim provided a show and tell. I'm just going to be talking, so it won't be nearly as exciting, but bear with me. So I think it would be helpful to put some context around where we're going, where we are and where we're going by taking a look at, a short look at the history of this issue. There's been, as Karina mentioned, I had the good fortune to serve as the agency lead for the 5G issue, pretty much from late 2019 on. And, it was really a fascinating initiative, I think, all across throughout the agency, certainly, but with other U.S. government partners and certainly with the telecommunications industry itself, which, again, I would call them partners as well. To put some perspective, the short timeline of history that I would bring forward is the 5G C-band potential interference issue was not something that just hit us all overnight. It was something that had been discussed as early as 2015. With numerous technical evaluations and reports and analysis done in the intervening years, that leading into the late 2021 auction of the 5G C-band spectrum, as Tim noted, 3.7 to 3.98 gigahertz. I think what's also very important to note is that beginning in the late 2021 timeframe is when there was very much public discussion of the issue because of the U.S. government agencies that had not always an alignment of their views on the potential implications of implementing a 5G C-band at the authorized power levels in the national airspace system. But I think the most important takeaway on this very high level timeline is that the aviation industry and the telecommunications industry began working together in earnest beginning in the 2021 time period and throughout certainly 2022 and 2023. Forgive me, I'm glancing down at a timeline because I told Karina this several times. I feel like we all missed a year or two, whether it was from COVID or 5G. I just don't know. But certainly for the people that follow the aviation part of this, and I know a lot of our stakeholders are on this call today, the FAA actively began issuing safety directives, the airworthiness directives and everything in 2022 and 2023, and those remain in place. What's also important to highlight about last year is, again, I would submit that while aviation began its retrofits in earnest in late 2022, early 2023, a phenomenal task considering some 10,000 aircraft were ultimately retrofit in just record time, and something that most people may not be familiar with. It's not a one-for-one, so there are more than one radio altimeter on board aircraft, with a general rule of thumb that we use is 2.5 radio altimeters. So just think about that in terms of scale. That the OEMs and the airlines were all subject to supply chain disruptions that were occurring as a result of COVID. So I just look back on the late 2022 timeframe and throughout 2023 as one of really it could not have happened if there had not been so many partnerships and, a really good technical understanding of each other's operating environments. That's something else maybe I could reflect on is certainly something that struck, I think, all of us in the agency and certainly in the industry, both industries, is we had to learn each other's language early on, and we had to learn it quick. Perfect example is the term carrier in our world means the airlines. And in the telco world, it's the telcos. So, I mean, that's a very simplistic example, but we had to learn each other's language and operating environments quickly in order to work together to solve the technical challenges that were ahead of us. And everyone knows this. The aviation side of the equation had to retrofit aircraft. They had to, pay for the retrofits. They had planes out of service. The telcos were not able to field all of their networks as planned. So everyone gave, and we reached the key milestone date of July 1st last year, and it was a day like any other in the National Airspace System. So that's pretty much of a very high level sketch over the last many years of dealing with 5G C-band implementation here in the US.
Thank you, Dee. And one thing that also came from all of that work that happened over the last couple of years, and I agree with Dee, it feels like we lost part of our minds and part of our lives to 5G. But one of the things that came out of that work, the coordination between the industries, is the voluntary agreements from the telecommunications industry that takes us to 2028. January 1st, 2028, which gives us a guiding post of what we need to do, where we need to go. And this is why we're also here, because AIA is taking on this tasking alongside many other stakeholders, including airlines, pilots, manufacturers, basically throughout the whole industry to get to this point. And so can we talk a little bit more about what is Roadmap to 2028 and why does it matter?
Yeah, and I appreciate the question. Certainly, I mean, it matters because, we have a real deadline out there. I think for just to put this into context, there's a total of 21 licensees that have been authorized to operate in the 3.7 to 3.98 gigahertz range. Those 21 providers voluntarily agreed to maintain the mitigations that the initial two telco providers, AT&T and Verizon, and the FAA had come to an agreement on. Those mitigations included, limitations on power and where antennas could be sited near airports. The additional licensees, the 19 additional licensees, understood the sheer magnitude of what had to be done in order to ensure that aircraft would continue operating safely in the National Airspace System once they move forward to implement their networks fully. So I think, and what that meant and what had to be done is obviously new performance standards for the radio altimeters that would be able to tolerate the changing technologies, because I think that's another important point. It doesn't stop here, right? I mean, we're already, you hear talk about the 6G and beyond. And so I think this is something that, that we have to be mindful of, that technology, whether it's in aviation, telecommunications, pick any industry you want, it's going to continue to evolve. And our equipment just needs to be robust enough to withstand that. So the RTCA, a standards development organization here in the US, and the European counterpart, EuroK, have been working together actually for a number of years to develop these new performance standards. And what's difficult, and we're going to talk about this in a little bit, is getting consensus on what those new performance parameters need to look like. And then think about it. When that new set of standards is agreed to, right, then these new boxes have to be designed, and that design needs to be approved. those newly approved designs then need to be built and installed. So that is something that, again, I gave you a number of 10,000 aircraft, both domestic and international, that were retrofit. That's a lot of boxes. So I think the 21 licensees, understood the sheer enormity of the task in front of aviation and agreed to the voluntary standards. I think what's also, and we're going to show you a slide here in a minute, is, it's proven, I think it's safe to say, to be even more challenging than we had initially anticipated. A lot, the group that was working on the new performance standards, oh, by the way, was also part of the technical group that was doing that real-time risk analysis, risk, mitigation, as we were developing the performance parameters for the filters needed to meet as I mentioned, in 2022, 2023 timeframe. But it was actually in a lot of ways great because it provided them a lot more data in order to inform the discussions at the RTCA and EUROCAE committees. But all of that said, I think it's recognized that for all of the things that we understand more clearly now about the operating environment, it's also raised a lot more challenges. So I think we put the idea of a roadmap to 2028 together pretty quickly after we got here, because I think, as Karina and I have talked many, many times, we cannot afford, we the aviation community, and I would argue the telecommunications community, can't afford to be in the same position that we were in 2020, right? And we have a date that has been provided. Let's back off from that and figure out what needs to be done and when it needs to be done by. So that was really the genesis of Roadmap to 2028. But I want to come back to something that Karina mentioned early on. Let's not forget those lessons learned. We all have come too far to kind of go back to square one. Yeah, right. And so that's really this group of stakeholders that participates in the roadmap discussions. It's drawn from across the industry. We have government participation. We are planning in the not too distant future. Our conversations will include telecommunications interests, because we do view this as kind of a shared situation.
Yeah, and I will also just add to a little point in terms of the work that RTCA and EUROCAE is doing. It's not just proving for 2028, they're future proving beyond 2028. So when there's questions on why can't we get there, this is going to be a state-of-the-art standard for these radio altimeters that are going to be future proof. It's not just to get us to 2028, it's beyond. And that's why we're also doing 2028, because we know that there needs to be two parallel work paths.
And you raise another point that I think is worth noting, and it may be obvious to folks, but we certainly are aware. One of the many, many differences between aviation and telco is how quickly the equipment can change. So in aviation, the avionics sometimes are in aircraft for decades. And that's the reality. The RA standards, I think, were developed in the 1950s timeframe. So, and telco, you all know it. I know it with my cell phone. It's the next generation of technology and capability. It's much more rapid. And that difference in our timelines, it's a fact of life, and we have to acknowledge it. But I think that I'm glad you mentioned that, because again, what the special committee at RTCA is really trying to anticipate is what else may impact the performance of these units.
And with that, we want to talk a little bit more about our goals for Roadmap to 2028. We mentioned parallel work paths, but what does it mean for AIA and for all our stakeholders that we're bringing together? And one of those items is the practical timeline. Dean mentioned it, but we need to work. We have the date. We need to work back from the date. And then I'll have you talk a little bit more about the government and industry side of things. Former government, now in industry, so perfect person to talk a little bit about that collaboration.
Yeah, no, I think, look, and I think you've mentioned it, I've mentioned it, I think Tim mentioned it as well. I mean, the only way to success is through a collaboration, a coordination, right? And I think, under the general lessons learned, there are, government agencies all have a set of responsibilities, right? And no one argues that point. I think what sometimes happens though, and again, one of the strong lessons learned that we can take is that everyone's got their roles, but it doesn't stop you all from talking together and figuring out if there's, if you see something that might happen up ahead, let's talk about it and try to figure out how to solve it beforehand, right? And again, it's no different than in industry. I mean, industry, different companies have their roles and responsibilities. But again, if there's enough of an indication that there's either a challenge ahead, an issue, I mean, it really argues for that strong coordination. I would say, again, the 5G issue, kind of coming back to the lessons learned, we learned from each other. We learned, I talked about our vocabulary. We learned about our risk, assessment methodologies. We learned about, our business environments, our operational environments. I think that, that would argue to me, because we do understand each other so well, to talk across industry more often, more regularly, create those venues. I mean, roadmap is with an intent, but I think we have endless opportunity to open up those communications. And, I think sometimes conversations should be just among industry, and I think other times they absolutely have to be between public and private interests. And again, one of the other items we flagged up there, the cross industry coordination. Tim and I are right now working on a proposal right now that expands, and it has nothing to do with 5G. Don't let me panic anyone on this call. But another potential opportunity to bring multiple industries together to share their best practices on risk methodologies. And, again, I can't underscore the criticality of it, at least in my mind. And maybe it's just having, what I consider a really unique opportunity to work with just incredible people from across the aerospace sector, from across the telecommunications sector, smart people, well-intentioned people. So, again, maybe I'm a little selfish about it, and maybe that's why I think it's just so important. And then the last thing is the communications aspect of this, right? We have to, and it goes a lot with the coordination and the collaboration, but the communications, I think AIA feels very strongly that we need to keep the lines of communication open. We need to be to the maximum extent possible transparent, without violating anyone's IP or anything. But it's important for all of you on this call, for all the stakeholders. Again, if we just look at just the aviation and telco industries, just to keep each other apprised of what's going on. It's just critical. And, look, at the end of the day in aviation, we do everything that we have to do in order to ensure that that an aircraft, takes off and lands safely and hopefully on time. Right? But, I think that the traveling public, the general public, they look at situations that they sense the government entities are fighting with each other or industries are fighting with each other. That just doesn't bode well in my mind. So that's a little bit of an editorial comment from me.
Yeah, and part of that communication is to host things like we're hosting today, and we'll continue to do more of this as we really reach milestones, as we have more conversations. We're going to continue to do these. And for our telecommunications partners that I know are listening in right now, we will be reaching out. We expect that outreach, expect that thing, and hopefully we can continue to have all this communication, not just aviation separately and telco separately, but hopefully together as we look to find the solution. Because as Dee said, we really care about having our industry maintain safety, but also ensuring that your industry can continue to have operations. It's not an either or, but that does require the coordination across all of our industries and all of our regulators. And then we talked a little bit about this, the parallel paths. And so we're going to talk a little bit more about what does roadmap to 2028 look like and what does the RTCA Special Committee 239, and I wrote plus just because there's so much work that happens under there. So Dee, if we wanted to talk a little bit more about our path, and then we'll have a little conversation on the broader path to beyond 28.
Yeah, no, I'm happy to, and I'll ask Tim to chime in. As Tim mentioned, he flew into Chicago yesterday, so I'm just sorry he can't be in the room with us today. But certainly value his partnership and his work on this front. So what we realized early on in the roadmap discussions, again, as I mentioned earlier, were the challenges of coming to consensus on new performance standards. Again, I shouldn't say unequivocally no. Very few standards are, easy to pull together. It's trying to get a lot of buy-in from a lot of different interests and stuff. But the work that Special Committee 239, the kind of lower half of the slide shows, is the work that we've talked about, the RTCA and EuroK committees doing that technical assessment. So what we were trying to reflect in this is kind of parallel paths, right? Because you'll notice that this particular chart does not have dates on it, and that is by design because that's what we're working on in our roadmap discussions. But what we also discerned is that because of the amount of time needed to develop these robust new performance standards, we had to have an alternate path in order to meet the January 1st, 2028 date. So, that's this kind of, Karina's going to kick me, and that's the simple path up on top where we're having a lot of discussion and analysis on what that environment looks like. If the telcos are all operating at their fully allowed limits. And then the clear conversation comes that we have to figure out which altimeters can safely work in that environment. And that includes the altimeters that have already been modified with filters. And so there is a potential that there will be some additional retrofits on some of the radio altimeters. But again, that's all work that is going on right now. And then the bottom part of the slide talks about kind of the standard process. The committee completes the work. The way voluntary industry standards are developed, there's a function of part of the process is public comment. Those comments are ultimately resolved, and then what we call MOPS, the minimum operation performance standards, are published. And then from the FAA's, the technical standard orders. And then, as I mentioned earlier, once all that gets done, then the new designs are produced by the manufacturers, and then it goes into a series of certification activities. And we didn't even show the box, I think, on the manufacturing. But the point is, it is not a simple process, and that is certainly by design. Aviation does not have margin for error. So this is it's a very, very comprehensive process. Tim, is there anything you wanted to add to this?
Dee, I would foot stomp what you said. First of all, I think the engineers are very clear on what the expectations are, and that expectation is 0 defects. As we fly, we as the flying public expect that the plane will get there, and we expect that the systems that are critical to the plane getting there will operate full stop, right? And in order to facilitate that, we take a very careful, thoughtful, procedural approach to developing new standards, testing the impact of those standards, and then manufacturing things that will meet those standards. That is a unique expectation for this industry. We are different than many other industries in that our expectation for defects is pretty close to zero. And so that's why we do what we do, and why sometimes it takes a little bit of time, because that's what I, as a flying public, that's what I want.
Well said.
And I want to touch a little bit on that because it's not just the US problem. Roadmap 2028, just as a disclaimer, we're focusing on the US problem. But when we're talking about the long-term solution, these aircraft are flying all over the world.
Very important point. Yep.
So we added the Global Spectrum Coordination Framework, which is a little box in this slide, but
it's a big deal.
It's a big deal and it's a lot of work. And I think one thing to acknowledge is in the bottom part of the slide is that's a simplified version of what is really happening. And it includes not just the US, includes all other countries, and it includes all of our civil aviation organizations to coordinate. And it's a lot of work, but it's work that is getting done, and it's work that our industry is dedicating a tremendous amount of man hours into this. So I just want to really to foot stomp this, that it's not an easy solution. It's not an easy thing that we can flip a switch and solve the problem, but we wanted to make sure that that is present, that it's a big task that we're taking on. And Roadmap 28 is I would say it's another box in that big process. But on the Global Spectrum Coordination Framework, Dee, can you talk a little bit more about what we're seeing and maybe what we might expect to see in terms of that coordination and the work being done?
Yeah, I mean, I think, look, there's established processes for, coordination of spectrum, the UN body, the ITU, and they've got a framework that's been around for a while, like most UN processes. But again, I mentioned at the kind of beginning of our conversation that the 5G C-band issue was first raised in 2015, and that was at the World Radio Conference, right? Yeah. And so I'm just giving a short recitation of the fact that there are a lot of bodies that are global bodies that work to coordinate spectrum. And I think the other point to make here is spectrum is not a free-for-all, right? And because you mentioned it, it is a finite resource. It has to be managed carefully. I think that it's heavily regulated, and even though the process doesn't always make everyone happy, or the outcomes, I should say, doesn't always make everyone happy. I think it's important to note that it's a highly processed dance coordination. Closer to home, I know just from my time in and out of the agency, the FAA deals with spectrum issues all the time, right? 5G C-band was one in a long string of, and they will continue, because as we have talked about, as innovation occurs, as technology advances, as machines get smarter, again, do we get smarter about the use of the spectrum? I think all of that. So the FAA certainly is in coordination with the U.S. partners here in the U.S., the FCC and NTIA. I would also really emphasize that the FAA is constantly talking with other civil aviation authorities, throughout the globe. But on this particular issue and spectrum issues generally, when there are concerns and there has to be coordination, because, Corinne, to your point, our aircraft are flying all over the place. Other countries' aircraft are flying all over the place. They're in constant communication, particularly with those states of design, Brazil, Canada, Europe. So I think it could be a topic for just a webinar all unto itself, just to really focus on how spectrum is managed and allocated and coordinated. And and as I said, when a regulator like FAA is talking to their partners in the government that are regulators, say for the telcos, those conversations go on all the time. I don't want people to have the impression we only talk to each other when there's like we've got a problem, Houston, but those conversations go on. And, again, the US now has a national spectrum strategy. I think it gives us an idea of, what we can anticipate, which is why, I think kind of coming back to why is AIA stepping into this so fully is, I think all of us would rather anticipate than react. Certainly when things are not as easy as they might have seemed.
Thank you. And I just wanted to make sure that we touched on that because it always comes up. It's a US problem, yes, but it's also a global problem. So thank you for touching on that. And also, just before we move on to questions, wanted to flip some on what you said, that we care because a large amount of our platforms rely on reliable and continuous access to spectrum. And we will continue to be involved to represent our members, and we'll continue to do that with the lessons learned that we've had. And so as we move on to questions, I'm going to start with that first question. What are the lessons learned that you have from this ordeal?
Well, I think I've shared just some perspectives, in some of my earlier comments. Certainly, I believe industries can learn from each other, whether we're expanding our vocabulary or whether we're, learning about each other's, operating environments or what keeps you awake at night. I think that's important. I think, though, some of the other things that really struck me was, first of all, I learned more about telecommunications than I ever thought possible. I went for a while, I was writing down a new word every day. But, I think even within the agency, pulled together so quickly, really one of the finest teams I've ever worked with. That was a huge lesson to learn because I think for all of us that were just doing 5G morning, noon, and night, FA is a big place, 47,000 people, right? And sometimes can be very siloed like big organizations can be. And I think what this brought was just the best of everyone and organizations just fully cooperating and coordinating with each other. So again, I don't know if other people or entities or companies felt that. I thought that was important. I think another lesson learned, I kind of alluded to it when I was talking about, kind of the regulators talking with each other. I think it's no secret that the regulators don't always agree on issues and approaches, but I think it gave us a new level of understanding about, what type of information we should present, say, to other regulators that, just provided them the basis by which we were making safety decisions in the US. I think what a lot of people assumed was, 5G C-band it's a static thing. It's one size fits all, and it's not. I mean, 5G C-band is operating around the globe, but it operates with different characteristics than it does here in the US. And I think again, a lesson learned coming back was the conversations between the regulators. What kind of information should they present that would, instead of debating back and forth for weeks about why did you come to that conclusion, this is the kind of information that we need. And then I think maybe a last thing is, and I've said it before, I think, but I'm going to say it again. And really, the roadmap, people hear this all the time. We cannot go back to 2020. We know that spectrum will continue to be reallocated. We know that technologies will continue to evolve. Let's just sit down and talk and really try to anticipate what the impact, as you talked about, the impact to aerospace, which is what we have to be on the leading edge for, but the impact to the other industries, right?
Thank you. And just as a reminder for anyone watching, if you have a question, feel free to put it in the chat. We're tracking them so we can go ahead and answer them. But I do want to add, when we were talking about lessons learned from, at least when all of this is happening, we were on the industry side, and a big lesson learned was that need for constant communication. So many stakeholders, so many ideas, and that communication is crucial. That information sharing is crucial to get anywhere, especially when information at that point was changing every day. Every day we learned something new, and every day we had to intake, process it, and somehow agree on it. And that required a lot of coordination. I think we're in a way better situation now where everyone is talking, we understand our language a little bit better, and everyone just doesn't want to be, like I said, back in 2020. So that's why we're moving forward.
I think maybe just to add on, and Tim, I really will let you get over it in edgewise. You know how I feel about 5G. But I think for all of us that kind of were so heavily involved in this, I think at the end of the day, these are two vital industries for the US, right? Aviation and telecommunications. It's in our collective best interest to make sure that they're both highly successful. So, I mean, to me, that's kind of one of the most obvious reasons to have these kind of conversations.
We do have a question on the chat, and it's about timelines and outreach to different organizations. And I'll start answering it a little bit, and I'll pass it over to you. But this is a very technically challenging topic. We're working, we're analyzing, we're doing our due diligence on our end so that when we go to our telco partners, we're prepared and we're ready. But I can let you add a little bit.
No, I think, again, I think I'll confess that I was maybe a bit too optimistic, and thinking, in my mind, I was voting we'd be talking with each other like this summer. I don't, I can't give an absolute date, but I don't think it's far away. I think, look, even if we don't have all the answers, and some of the telcos know that we're planning on reaching out, even if we don't have all the answers, the sooner we engage with each other, the better, in my mind. So we will absolutely, communicate early once we have a better idea. And as Karina said, we don't want to go in there and say, hey, so how was your summer? I mean, there's a lot of hard work still ahead of us. And I don't want anyone to have any illusions about that. But I think we can at least anticipate now the kind of information that we need to come in with in order to have a meaningful dialogue.
Perfect. And I think going on that, what are the technical challenges that remain? We've talked about this and needing to have all of this ready. So I guess this will also go to Tim in terms of what technical challenges remain.
Yeah, what you're really looking at is how do we characterize the environment in which we're operating? How do we know how strong the signals are going to be? How do we know what the boxes on the airplanes, how do we know at an aggregate level how they perform in those environments? We're still in the process of trying to make sure that we have very concrete answers to that. And as engineers, this is what we do. I would emphasize that that all of the things that we're talking about here, all of the problems are solvable. They can be solved. But as Dee said, in order to solve them, we need to come together with the telecoms, we, the aviation industry, and the telecom industry need to come together and look at things and say, okay, we can do this, you can do that, and just solve the problem. And I think that we're getting to a very good place where we, at very least, are well characterizing the environment in which we're operating. From there, you can move forward to, well, how do you respond to it?
Anything to add, Dee?
What he said.
Okay, it's that we have a question from the chat, and is, if these mitigations aren't put into place by January 28th, what will that mean for restrictions the FAA will need to impose, and what will that mean for airlines and passengers? Will this potential disruption be at the scale of what we have seen in the years before, more, less?
Okay, so let me take the last part first. I question that there were that there was any kind of disruption
Yeah.
at all, to be honest with you. So whoever's asking the question, if you could provide some data on that, that would be helpful. But I think that's exactly the reason that we're talking today about roadmap to 2028. That certainly we recognize that we have to be in a position that if on January 1st, 2028, 21 telecommunications providers want to go, full on, we have to be in a position of making sure that the national airspace system is safe. Certainly, that's the AIA goal. That's you got to underscore it's the FAA's goal. So again, I think the question reflects an understanding that as I just said, there's a lot of work still to be done. But I'm very optimistic, and I'd even maybe suggest confident that we'll get there.
Yeah, and the clarification from the question was, it was a question of what could we have seen, not what we did see. So the possibilities.
What we could have seen. Well, again, I think I'm going to put my FAA hat back on because we had, as you might guess, a lot of conversations about that. The unknown was the risk, right? We could prove in lab testing that interference could occur, but you couldn't occur in a real environment where there's other factors, just a deviation on a flight path or a weather or something like that. I think the FAA will always plan for the worst case. So, again, I think the very fact that the FAA went into the mode that it did, in conjunction, and this is important, in conjunction with the voluntary mitigations that at first it's just AT&T and Verizon had agreed to, but then all of the other 19 entities. So I think you had that combination of the safety measures that the FAA put in place, along with the operating environment behaving in a predictable kind of a way. That's why you didn't see the kind of disruptions. I don't even think I want to speculate on what could have happened. I certainly wouldn't have wanted to been up in a plane if I didn't know what was going to, the plane was going to be able to use its systems the way they were designed to use.
Yeah, I think when we were talking about what the impact could have been, we were all losing a little bit of sleep on what it could have been. But the goal is, as Dee said, to make sure that we're not there, that we're not back to 2020, and that we continue to have these conversations and find a good solution. And that's why we wrote on our slide, is that it's going to take aviation, it's going to take telco, it's going to take all of our regulators to get there and to ensure that the flying public can continue to feel safe in the airspace. One following question, and you touched a little bit about this, is that spectrum is not stagnant. Technology keeps moving, things keep moving. Are we expecting to see more disruption to the RA band? And if so, I know, loaded question.
But look, I mean, again, the conversations have already started. It's valuable property. So I think, certainly we can anticipate, conversations, movement and everything. But again, I'm going to come back to this point is let's all talk together and go into it. I don't care what part of the industry, which industry you're in, with the eyes wide open, because by the way, this is not just an aviation thing with telco, right? A lot of other industries are having these exact same conversations. So again, the best I can say is, if there's smarter ways of using resources, let's talk about that.
Thank you. Tim, any additional thoughts?
I think that my anticipation, as Dee said, is that yes, there will absolutely be further talks in the future about spectrum. Spectrum is a critical enabler to economic activity. And so that's part of the reason why when you look at the RTCA approach, they're looking at it with that anticipation that how do we deal with changes? things that happen outside our frequency. How do we make sure that we are robust to them? And that's part of the reason why it takes a little bit of time to get to the answer. So yes, there will be changes. We know that very well. What they will be and what how their impact could turn out to us, we don't yet know, but we're trying to be preemptive in the way that we approach solutions.
Well said.
Well said. We have about 4 minutes remaining, so I want to give both of you the opportunity to close with some final thoughts on this topic and just in general, all the work that's been done and that will continue to be done. And if there's additional follow-up questions, feel free to reach out to our team. Ananda, who is our comms person, can let us know, and we'll find answers for you.
So first of all, thanks for moderating, Karina. And Tim, thanks for making a go of it despite a very busy day that you have out there anyway. And, finally, maybe a thanks to all of you on this call, A, for joining, but B, for those that have been involved in working the 5G C-band implementation in the US. Really is appreciated. I think Karina mentioned it before. We are going to be having regular discussions, webinars, and other outreach. Again, 5G C-band implementation in the US is not solved. And so we need to keep the focus on it. You're going to be hearing a lot from us about that. We're pushing out some other materials. And frankly, would welcome your feedback on how we can continue to improve these webinars on the topic of spectrum. So with that, I'll turn it over to Tim for some last comments.
Yeah, first, I would be remiss if I didn't recognize the engineers who are working on these standards. Radio frequency work in a lot of ways is black magic, and the people who are working on these things are absolute experts in the field. There are not many of them. They are in high demand, and they are excellent people to work with. They really know what they're doing, and I really want to recognize them. Second, I would again emphasize that this is a solvable problem in as much as we work together across industries. But third, I would say it's not easy. Just because we're saying it's possible doesn't mean that it will be a quick solution. It's going to be some work to get there, but I am very confident that we can and will get there. My expectation is safe flight and functional cell phones. I want them both. And I think we can get there, and I'm looking forward to the road, as tough as it might be, to make that happen. So thank you both for inviting me. It's been a pleasure to be here.
Thank you, and thank you all for joining us. We will continue to have these Aero Insights on this topics and many more regarding civil aviation. And as mentioned, if you have any questions, please reach out to our team and we'll make sure to answer. Thank you very much.